Good morning, everybody. How are we feeling this morning? Bit dusty? Big nights? Welcome to day 3 of GCAP. This is a pretty special event. This is Industry Day. And this day has been especially curated for developers and industry professionals to have the space to communicate directly. So make sure you do a lot of that today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ray Johnston, and I'm a long-suffering games advocate, as well as a journalist and your MC for today. We are gathering here today on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the larger Kulin Nation. The first science, technology, engineering, and mathematics was practiced on this land where sovereignty was never ceded. And I wish to pay my respects to elders past and present, whose great sacrifices allow us to be here today, to the grandmothers who wove in the dark so that we could weave in the light, and to my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles who are here with us in the room today. Mundunguwu, thank you and respect. Now today at GCAP, there is a focus on networking and workshops and panels and roundtables and conversations and something called cross-pollination, which I really hope is a metaphor. GCAP Loading also has a whole bunch of fantastic talks that are aimed at people entering the industry, but I reckon we can all probably learn something from. So, to get started, I would like to introduce our next guest. Please welcome Carolyn Pitther, the CEO of Film Victoria.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ray. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. 2019 marks the 14th iteration of this incredible conference. And whilst every year GCAP is a hotbed for new ideas and shared gaming dialogue, this year the buzz out there, I think, is next level, particularly in terms of the media coverage that we've had in the lead up to this week. Right now, the eyes of the Australian games industry are squarely on Melbourne, the games capital of Australia. But over the last few weeks, the eyes of the international games industry have also been on Melbourne, thanks to a certain white-feathered, yellow-billed goose. No, that's not me. Maybe sometimes on a Friday night. Huge congratulations to the whole team at House for giving us all an outlet through which we can channel our frustration into mischief and joy. We at Film Victoria are proud to have supported the creation of Untitled Goose Game. Actually, we're incredibly proud of all of the games projects that we support. In 2018-19, Film Victoria invested over $1.3 million in 23 projects through our games production funding. Last week, we announced over $760,000 of investment for just 13 projects here in Victoria. That'll generate about $1.8 million in production expenditure in terms of what is injected into our economy, and hundreds of employment opportunities in the games sector within this state. This included support for the first project from new Victorian company Summerfall Studios. The first project will be announced this weekend at PAX. Summerfall founders Liam Esler and David Gader said, "Melbourne's tight-knit and supportive games community was one of the key reasons they chose Victoria. And that's certainly evident here in this room and at GCAP more broadly. Victorian games developers encourage each other's creativity, they push one another to achieve great things and share in each other's trials and tribulations. The digital games industry certainly has its challenges, but it's not just the Victorian or the Australian games industry that's grappling with them. Around the world, the way we consume media is constantly changing, which in turn changes the way media is created. That means for games developers like yourselves, the ground is moving and shifting under your feet every day, every hour. As new platforms like Apple Arcade and Google Stadia emerge, it's not instantly obvious how they're going to change your roles as creators or change how you interface with your audience. Whilst none of us can predict the future or control the environment around us, there is consistent growth and success in the Australian industry. It's fantastic to see Australian developers finding large and enthusiastic audiences for the games that you create and taking centre stage at global events. And it's especially fantastic to see everyone coming together at events like this, GCAP, to share your work with your peers, both from here and from overseas, and shape your own careers. At Film Victoria, we're constantly looking at how we can respond to this shifting landscape to better support you. Earlier this year, we changed our games release program to be available at any time, that is on demand. This allows Victorian games developers to be able to apply to us and then make their decision on how and when they would like to release their game. So we're now looking ahead to 2020 and beyond. And if you have more feedback and ideas, please search out this week the Film Victoria team in Liam and Meredith, who are sitting in the third row. Catch them at 11 a.m. today at the State Agency Games Funding Panel discussion alongside fellow representatives from Screen West, Screen Tasmania and Screen Queensland. Now I'd like to shout out to all of those state agencies and South Australian Film Corp as well who are here across this conference. It's so great to see other state screen agencies supporting games in Australia, and we'd like to see more state screen agencies and of course the federal government join us in this journey as we actually take on the world with great projects. Tomorrow we're hosting our annual Game for Change lunch to recognise and celebrate non-binary and women industry professionals. I look forward to welcoming those of you who actually got one of those precious golden tickets. We had a restricted number and they were in high demand. This year's theme of building a supportive community and a kick-ass career is what we're going to discuss, and I think, Ray, you'll be joining us too, which is great. It's a testament to the large growth in the number of you working in this industry, and we just can't host everyone, but hopefully next year we'll be even bigger and can host more of you. As you all know, there are many ways to build a career in games. One such path is through art and animation. Film Victoria has partnered with Cartoon Network's Imagination Studios, who recognises the value a good animation can bring to the games experience and vice versa. Later today, 11 teams will be pitching their animation ideas to execs from Cartoon Network in the hope that it will be picked up for further development. Come along to the session. Take the opportunity to have a chat to Silas and Josh from Cartoon Network. Maybe your game will make a great animated series in the future. I hope these few days have been filled with opportunities for you to connect, stimulate ideas, and motivate you and also motivate you to forge ahead on what might be next for your careers. The opening of new studios and outposts and the success of a goose that honks at small children certainly provide a beacon or a motivation. But at the end of the day, it's your bold new ideas, your willingness to face challenges ahead, and your belief in yourselves and each other that will continue to light the way and move this amazing industry forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Our next guest, Ricky Haggert, is a founder and creative director of London-based studio Hollow Ponds. And over the last 10 years, he's made a bunch of really unusual, playful games in collaboration with a whole bunch of artists that are generally outside of the games industry. He's also a founder of Wild Rumpus, running video game-related parties and events. Please welcome Ricky to the stage.
Hello. That was a pretty decent introduction. My name is Ricky Haggert. My talk is called Sharing Creative Responsibility, or how to start making a game with no idea what you're doing and then continue making it hiring people to help, but still not really knowing what it is, and refusing to commit to a definite plan until the last possible moment, while striving to respect the time and creative energy of your collaborators and end up with a game that's good and original without anyone getting burnt out. Just digest that for a moment. Okay, that's enough. So who am I? Ray did a decent job there. I'm a founder of a London-based studio called Hollow Ponds. Previously, I ran a studio called Honey Slug. My day-to-day work there is like as a game director and a programmer. Hollow Ponds works entirely with freelancers. It's a company run by myself and my wife, and then all the people that work with us are freelancers. We work with publishers, and we aim to make commercially viable art games. So just going to look at some of the games I've made in the past. This is a game called Hohokum from 2014. We made this for PlayStation. It was a PS3, PS4, and Vita, published by Sony Santa Monica. And this is like a playful musical adventure game. You're this like kind of long snake creature, and you don't have any explicit goals, and you kind of wander around the world quite freely and exploring and playing with the toys and the characters that you find in various places. And listen to some cool music. This is Loot Rascals. This is a game we self-published in 2017 on PlayStation 4 and PC. And it's a science fiction roguelike set in space Scotland, where you kind of explore an alien planet and you beat up a bunch of these weird creatures, and you win these loot cards, which you then rearrange to give you different like special abilities, and a bunch of cool characters there. This is a game that we just shipped last month. This is Wilmot's Warehouse, Switch, PC, and Mac, published by Finji. And this is a game where you run a warehouse. You're a little white square with a smiley face called Wilmot. And you work there in this warehouse, and lots of different products arrive in the warehouse. And your job is pretty much just to organize those products using whatever system you want, as long as you're able to find them again. It's fine. That looks nice, doesn't it, on that screen? Huh. There he is. I can't talk about the current game we're working on. We've been working on another game for a while now. So you just get some concept art of like some allotments, or like I think Australia don't have allotments, but this is like community gardens there on the left, and some beehives. So, what do these games have in common? They're all quite original. And I think they turned out pretty well. Like, I'm pretty happy with them. The game designer role was shared between multiple team members. There wasn't anyone on any of these games who had the sole role of like being the game designer. They were all the products of an exploratory process where we sort of felt our way through, figuring out what we were trying to do as we went along. And the first prototypes, in all cases, were pretty different from the thing we shipped, and quite large creative decisions were being made all the way up to the end. Nobody got burnt out, no one crunched, and we're a geographically distributed team, so we're all over the place, mostly in the UK, but not exclusively. We worked with people in a bunch of other countries as well. So this is going to be a talk about the process by which we make games. I'm not really going to talk about those games again, specifically. And our process is something we've been thinking and talking a lot about recently. The benefits of our process and the problems it has and how we try and mitigate those problems. So first up, some quick caveats. This is just some stuff that works for us. And I know that everyone's situation is different. And I'm generally wary of like giving, framing what I say as advice for people without knowing what any of your individual contexts might be. So hopefully just like think of this as a sort of series of anecdotes or ideas which hopefully you can draw some useful parallels to your own work or future situations. It's definitely not me saying, you should do this. And if I accidentally sort of lapse into that sort of way of saying something, then just bear this in mind. I'm not a student of any like proper development methodologies. Everything here is like homespun stuff that we've just figured out organically. I could totally believe that there's, parallels or overlaps with other things that people are already doing out there. I'm coming at this from the perspective of being a studio head, as somebody that hires people rather than somebody who, joins a team. And finally, a quick caveat about privilege. I've had a lot of time to figure this stuff out in like a really sort of creatively supportive environment with some people who kind of gave us a lot of chances to figure this stuff out. So, You know, if this feels, some of this stuff feels out of reach, like especially if you're sort of starting out, then don't worry. Like yeah, it takes time to get to this point, I think, in some cases. Quick honourable mention from my colleague, Richard Hogg, or Dick Hogg. This is a guy I collaborate with on lots of video games. We've been making games together for I think over 12 years now. And in a bunch of the games that we make, although not all of them, we sort of share the lead creative role. Okay, so we're going to get into it. So this is going to be like a series of diagrams in a format that I kind of made up that sort of presents an idealized version of like how a game might start life and progress as we add people to it. So at the start, there's an idea. I'm using pink here to sort of designate creative work. So like at the start, one of us has an idea, maybe me, maybe Dick. And then we meet up and we discuss that idea. And the other one of us will add their perspective. And now there are sort of these two related ideas. And then over time, you know, maybe over weeks or months, we talk about it more, and the ideas start to merge together and turn out to be a thing we kind of like the sound of maybe making, you know, putting some proper time into. So then we start making a thing. So then that involves doing maybe some visual work and some technical work, some programming. I'm using yellow here as like a key for visual work and blue for technical work. You know, at this point, it's probably a small team thing. It's probably just me and Dick making a thing. You know, me doing a bit of programming and Dick doing some art. And sort of getting to the point where you've got something that you can sort of have a go at and play with and think about what you think about it. And at this point, there are developers who will favor like a fail-fast approach, and like, you know, they'll evaluate that prototype and they'll either keep working on it or they will decide to go back to square one and have another idea and make another prototype. Or another approach is, you know, maybe they just prod it along for a long time, you know, spend a long time on it. Like when we made Hohokum, there were a series of prototypes that we made over several years before we ended up with the one that we eventually got signed. But recently, and certainly with the current game we're making, we've taken the approach of hiring some people when we get to this prototype stage who can do practical jobs, you know, programming or 3D modeling or animation, but also to kind of share the job of helping to figure out what this thing's actually going to be. So at first people come in and you give them some tangible jobs to do. But over time, hopefully, what happens is that these like little pockets of creative responsibility start to appear throughout the team. You know, either spontaneously or because you've kind of explicitly given somebody a remit to be like, well, I want you to do this as your main job, but like, here are some other things you can think about that we just don't, you know, we don't know whether these, you know, go and explore some stuff. And these pockets are to be nourished and supported, not to be crushed. And then hopefully at some point, the original, you know, creative team has kind of lost control of what's going on, and you're all off on an exciting adventure together. Yeah. So I want to be clear that this doesn't mean that the game doesn't have a creative heart, or that, you know, you don't need creative leaders, because I think you do. I see this as like a cloud, like kind of billowing out in all directions. And at some point, it's going to come, you know, settle down, hopefully, to become like a coherent piece of work. And although the creative leads don't have control over what appears in that cloud, they do get to decide how long to let the cloud go outwards before sort of pulling it back together and letting it sort of coalesce into a thing. And, you know, which bits of the cloud to waft away, get rid of. And probably if I was do another one of these diagrams, it would probably show like these sort of spidery pink bits might sort of get pulled into more to the center and like form more of a coherent, you know, central creative lump in the middle. You know, it isn't that there isn't a sort of creative heart, like a solid core. It's just that it doesn't start in the center and just grow outwards with the core creative team. You know, these ideas come in from all kinds of other places. My friend Barut the other day did a thread on Twitter where he was going through various phrases that games companies use in job adverts and sort of translating them into what they really mean. He says here, any place that has a highly creative or collaborative environment, everyone here will be super nice, but if you cannot identify the adult in the room or the editor, you'll die crunching on all the shit people add to the game that's not cohesive but is wacky fun. And I think, yeah, like one of the roles of a creative lead is to be that adult in the room. So, some benefits of this way of working. The core creative team don't feel like they're carrying the entire responsibility of everything on their shoulders. So they're less likely to feel exhausted, worn out, burnt out at the end of a project. Team members have the opportunity to be genuinely involved in the creative process, in what gets made. And the game benefits from a bigger pool of ideas to draw on. So it's like this is like people-led creativity rather than idea-led creativity. It's like the people are more important than the sort of original vision here. A thing that follows on from this is me wanting to push back against auteur culture. In our industry and in other industries, I think especially in the film industry as well, we have this culture of being obsessed with auteurs, the idea that there's this genius visionary and that everyone's kind of working hard to realize that one person's vision. And we think that's unhealthy, and we're actively trying to push against that. So some sort of practical advice, I guess, on how we manage people in our team. We're bringing people in to work with us, and a big part of how successful the thing we make turns out to be is in the way in which we interact with our team. And obviously we all want to make good things and work, produce good work. But I think there are a bunch of ways that you can be more deliberate about the way in which you work with people. So first off, when is a good time to involve other team members? Because there's a balance to be struck here, right? Too soon, and it can be kind of stressful, even just wrapping your brain around what you're even making, at the same time as trying to manage the work of other people. Because you do still need to be able to tell people kind of what you want them to do and why you want them to do it. And so too soon can be difficult. But too late, you do it too late and you miss out on the benefits of this, all that stuff I was talking about before. And so you need some kind of comfort zone of confidence where you have at least a hunch about what you're making and why. And because you need to transfer that confidence, at least in some part, to your collaborators. We aim for a point where, in the final third of development, when production's kind of going full steam ahead and everyone's just frantically making stuff all the time, everything's coming together. At that point, you kind of want everyone to internalize the creative vision to the point that good ideas just come from anywhere, and it just doesn't matter anymore where the stuff's coming from. So this is a slide about trying to, fostering creative security. For us, the confidence and the creative security of our team is one of the most important things to optimize for. And I think we're actually it's more important for us to be proud of the way that we made something than it is the end result. So we kind of try to kind of create a culture of creative inclusion and allow people's roles to be as fuzzy as they feel comfortable with. That means the credits are always really hard to write. This is the thing we're kind of grappling with at the moment, is how you condense people's contributions in a game into some sort of text thing that you can summarize exactly what they did is actually really tough to do. It's also okay if people just want to do the job they were hired to do. That's fine as well. We're not forcing this on people. And sometimes, as a creative lead, you will have to step in and be the boss, and that can kind of feel uncomfortable. You often will, it's very unlikely you'll get through a whole game where, at least a couple of times you reach this point where there's an impasse and someone has to make a decision, someone has to make a call, and, ultimately that's going to be the creative leads. And I think that's okay as long as that person doesn't automatically win the arguments. There's not a voting democracy type thing, but it's those creative leads allowing themselves to be swayed by, arguments and properly engage in discussions about the direction to take. Compromise is good here. Some challenges about this stuff for creative leads. Don't just pay lip service to this. I think, if you're somebody that doesn't feel comfortable sharing the creative vision and doing this kind of thing, that's totally okay. But definitely don't pretend to do this, but then not actually really engaged with the process of letting other people, into the sort of creative process. This isn't enforced fun, like I said before, it's totally okay if people just want to focus on the tasks that are in their comfort zones. And, when you start to offer people some creative freedom to figure things out, also just make sure that you're kind of aware of what their level of comfort for that is, for taking on that responsibility. And finally, kind of obviously, make sure people are properly credited and paid for the work that they're doing on your game. This is a quote I love. Unhappy people don't make good things. For me, it doesn't really matter whether this is true or not. I think it's just like a useful, morally ambiguous way to operate. And I think a big part of our management style is just trying to get people to just calm down and relax and enjoy the process rather than putting pressure on them. And try to minimize drama. Spending a lot of time making something where you don't really know what you're doing can be quite nerve-wracking at times, and it's totally natural that it is. But it's important to not let those nerves to allow drama to spread and sort of spiral into a sense of, panic or fear about what you're doing. People kind of running around flailing, going, we don't know what's going on, there's a terrible problem, we don't know what we're going to do about it. That kind of thing can be really toxic. So it's really important to try and keep everything calm and sort of assured and just sort of remind people that it's all going to be fine. You're not avoiding talking about potential problems. It's just discussing those things in the context of well, of course we're going to figure this out, rather than, oh no, there's this huge problem, we don't, minimize drama. Communication. People like to communicate in different ways. Some people like doing calls, some people hate them. Some people much prefer typing. Some people struggle with big walls of text scrolling up the screen. And you want to try to be attuned to this stuff and think about it and roll with what works for people. When you have an opinion, I think it's useful to think about not just the opinion itself and why you think it, but also how strongly you hold it and communicate that. I think it's very easy to kind of get caught up in all the sort of nuts and bolts of an opinion that you have, without really ever thinking, well, how strongly do I really feel about this? And if you don't feel that strongly, it's really good to just be able to say, well, here's what I think, but I don't know, I don't feel that strongly about it. Feel free to push back or whatever, or have a completely different opinion. Or conversely, you might feel really strongly about a thing, and then you say, I feel really strongly about this, and here's why I do. A thing I say a lot is I have a hunch. Using that sort of phrase of having a hunch. It seems like a good way to communicate the sense that this stuff's being felt out. There's not some grand plan carved into stone tablets somewhere. At the start, you kind of want to have lots of hunches and weak opinions about things. And then, we have in video games, we have this sense of defining pillars. You define the pillars of your game, and then you make sure that everything you think about and talk about and the decisions you make tie back to those pillars. And I get why that's useful, but I think that defining those pillars too soon can tend you to make things that are like other things and can make the whole process a bit too rigid. We've never defined pillars for any of the games we've made, and I think despite that, you could go back and look at all the games and you could sort of identify retrospectively pillars, but those pillars weren't ever formally created or talked about. So I can't do a talk like this without a slide on playtesting. Playtesting is the point where you start to test all your hunches and weak opinions against reality. That's what it's for. We do observed playtests. We watch people play the game who's never seen it before for about an hour, and we write up detailed notes of everything that we've seen or what's been said, and then we share that with the team and we discuss all of the conclusions together. And we encourage team members, if they want to run their own playtests with friends and to write up their own notes and draw their own conclusions, and then we just discuss that in the same way. This is a slide specifically about tools you will use if you're a distributed team and you kind of need a place to go. I guess it's also applicable if you all work in a big room, but I think less so. So our Slack is where we go every day, and it's where the culture of our team is formed and it develops. We have groups for the various aspects of the game, art and technical, animation, audio, and it's important that like everybody in the team is in pretty much all the groups. So like if an animator posts like a beautiful bit of animation, then everyone sees that in the team and everyone can kind of comment on it and talk about it. We also just use general for just chatting, like in the way you would just be nattering away in an office. So with Slack and other tools, you have some control over like how much of the creative iceberg is above and below the water. You can make private channels with multiple people in them and talk about stuff behind the scenes. And sometimes that's really useful. Like it's kind of handy to be able to do that. But the danger is that those groups can sometimes turn into like secret societies and sort of gradually over time feature creep into being like discussions for wider reasons, having wider responsibilities. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely a thing to be keeping an eye on as you go along. What are the aesthetics of doing that in terms of how your team works? And similarly with DMs, like obviously DMs are really useful a bunch of times. Like it's, you don't want every single person in the team to have every one-to-one conversation in a public channel. But I think a thing to consider sometimes before you send a DM is like, is this really something that only us two need to see, or will posting it in a public channel actually have the potential to widen the perspective of other people on the team, or even just to like give the rest of the team the sense that they're like part of this this busy ant's nest of people making a thing. It's hard. It's really hard to get that balance right. But I think just being aware of these things is worthwhile. So who do we work with? Like I said at the start, HoloPons doesn't employ any full-time staff. We work with people pretty much exclusively on a freelance basis. And the kinds of games we make change a lot. Like we've made a bunch of different stuff. So we have different requirements for the kinds of people we need. And so over time, like most of the games we've made, I would say have like a sort of healthy mix of people we've worked with in the past and then new people that come along depending on like what we're making this time and who we might need. So I've said freelancers. We tend to only work with self-motivated, self-managing people. And lucky for us, we've reached the point where we're able to find people like that who also want to work with us. That took some time. The downside is that it's hard to get young, very inexperienced people into the team and feel like that's going to be okay. And this is definitely something we've been thinking about recently and sort of, trying to take a punt on people who don't really have any commercial experience, but you get the sense that it's going to work out. But it just feels more risky. And so it's kind of, this is still a work in progress for us. And then we often work with people who are flexible about the amount, the times when they work and, how other work. So we tend to work with people organically, taking them on in a way that suits them. We try to work around people. We often work with, for example, animators will go off and go and do a gig doing some other animation, like a film project perhaps. We maybe have programmers that have another video game that they're working on. We often have people that will work for fewer than 5 days a week. So those people have basically more eggs in the basket. It's not just our game that's funding them. And so, in some cases, this takes the pressure off a bit, both for them and us. It's nice when your game isn't the only source of income for somebody. And those people bring experiences from other teams and often come back to work with us, with a fresh perspective. And also, by spreading someone's, the budget for somebody's role out over a longer period of time. So instead of employing them 5 days a week, you employ them say 3 days or 4 days, or that can change throughout the course of a project. You basically buy yourself a bunch of time to mull things over, and just think about what you want to talk to them about the next moves. On Monday, a thing that happens for us is that generally Fridays tend to be quieter, And it's really nice to have, like, you know, a day when it's just a bit quieter on the Slack, and you maybe have some more time to do, you know, just the stuff that you were going to do in your own role. Just think about what might be next. Just a quick slide on clarifying what kinds of roles you might bring in, you know, to your project even quite early in the process. Artists and animators, you know, visual people, concept artists, programmers, engineers, technical people, audio, music folks, writers and performers, producers and generalists, but probably not marketing people. I think that we tend to get further along the process and have something a bit more coherent until we, like, I think it's worth saying, it's definitely worth making sure that marketing and PR folks are involved early enough that they can have a real impact in their work and really, like, help. You know, you definitely don't want to do that at the last minute, but we tend to involve those people a bunch later when we've got a pretty solid idea of what we're making. So this is a slide about less about people and more just like about the creative process in the abstract, I guess. Iterate aesthetics as much as systems. Yeah, we're not a studio that will sort of focus on the mechanics and, like, make prototypes which are like grey boxy or you know, or like programmer art, and then skin them, have artists come along and skin them. It's very much more that inspiration comes from both directions. You know, it's like, I think with all of the games, but particularly with Hohokum, we definitely, Dick would draw a load of stuff, and that stuff made it into the game from drawings, and then I would also program stuff, and that would make it into the game, and there were lots of things which are kind of these weird hybrids of just mashing those things together, and just, you know, and then later on animators came in and started doing animation stuff, and that had an impact, and audio things had an impact, and all of those things wove together. It definitely wasn't like, well, we figured the whole game out in an ugly way and then skinned it. And then the thing that follows on from this is, like, you know, this is more like a point about, you know, me personally, I guess, but like, I studied computer science, and my main, like, job is as a programmer. But, you know, over the years, I've really kind of worked hard to develop my sense of like visual literacy and taste. I spend quite a lot of time thinking about what I like and what I don't like, and just try and, you know, although none of my, or very little of my art makes it into a video game, apart from maybe some UI bits and bobs. You know, I think it's important that I can communicate really effectively with the people on the team who are doing visual art. Tiny moments. Yeah, a big sort of outcome of the way that we operate is it's really hard, if not impossible, to think about the big picture of what the game is too early on, because, like, you just don't really know. And so instead, the way that we think about these things is like small moments. You know, like a small moment could be 10 seconds, it could be less than a second, it could be just a split second in your game that can feel really nice, can look really nice, it can communicate something interesting, it can be meaningful. And then you can look at ways that these small moments connect with each other. You're kind of building this network of interesting things. It's kind of like the old expression, looking after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. You know, like, rather than a sort of top-down approach where we think about the big picture and then we sort of figure out what the small things have to be, we just focus on the small things and try and make them good and then see where that takes us. And then don't work too hard. This is the next slide. So this is an anecdote from one of Alfred Hitchcock's writing collaborators. He says, "When we came up against a block and our discussions became very heated and intense, Hitchcock would suddenly stop and tell a story that had nothing to do with the work at hand. At first, I was almost outraged, and then I discovered he did this intentionally. He mistrusted working under pressure. He would say, 'We're pressing, we're working too hard. Relax, it will come.' And of course, it finally always did." So yeah, circle things gradually. Try to just get a view of the landscape and commit to decisions as late as you possibly can. I think it's totally okay to punt decisions into the distance if you can safely get away with it at the time, rather than feeling you have to make them because it's come up. I think as people who make complicated technical things, there's like a thing that happens where our brains, the analytical parts of our brains sort of insist that we figure out answers to things. And we feel uncomfortable if we don't have an answer to a question. And I sort of want to push back against this and say, like, it's totally okay to not know the answers to questions. And you shouldn't feel like on the back foot by saying, don't know. Don't know the answer to that. We'll probably figure that out later. That's not failing, I don't think. Be confident in the process of how you're making a thing. Rather than feeling like the ideas themselves are precious and you have to be confident in them. It's okay to not be confident in the ideas, just be confident in the process. And then a more practical thing, like writing up notes from creative meetings is really useful. We have a bunch of, especially Dick and I have a bunch of conversations and meetings where we just talk about a bunch of stuff, and it's really useful to just the day after maybe just write all those up, and even the act of writing them up, you often have other ideas or thoughts, and then sharing them with the team, and so they can read them and then have discussions about that, and then that can often lead to other things. It's always really useful. Project management. Okay, project management. So I think it's fair to say that project management for us is an area where we generally feel a bit less confident, a bit less assured about what we're doing, and I think partly that comes with the territory, right? It's just the result of the way we operate. And I'm going to talk about our approach to this stuff, and I would be absolutely unsurprised if there are plenty of tricks or insights we're sort of missing here. So project management is really hard. We've been lucky over the years to work with publishing partners who trust us and who trust our process, and with whom we share a mutual understanding that the goalposts are movable, and it's just not a good idea to try to lock in dates for things, and we tend to have extremely flexible and vague milestones. Rather than trying to deliver a thing that you promised 3 months ago when everything was completely different. Just allowing that stuff to be much more malleable. We tend to operate on the basis of a kind of constructed just-in-time shantytown of project management things. They could be Excel spreadsheets or Trellos or Asanas or bits of paper or whatever combination of things that people personally want to use. And as we, I'd say early on it's much more just haphazard and fluid, and towards the end of a project it tends to, those lists tend to become more formalized, and we try to do a better job of gathering all the tasks together and work through them in a manageable way. But broadly speaking, we don't try to manage our projects in a great deal of detail throughout the whole thing. But sometimes deadlines are good, because they're deadlines are a good way to get people to pull together and all focus on a bunch of tasks and feel like you've kind of got to a point, a mark in the sand. It's we did this. And we found that a good process for us has been just using playtesting as that. So, we'll maybe have a playtest at the end of every week or at the end of every fortnight as a kind of artificial deadline, and then figure out what we're going to do in time for that playtest, have the playtest, write up the notes, and then talk about what the next bunch of things might be for the next week or 2 weeks. There's this thing I saw on Twitter from Yana Basto here called Time Horizons. She did this thread. I think she's talking about web development, project management. But there was this thing, as I was putting this talk together, I came across this thing called Time Horizons, and it's just the idea that you specifically identify these phases in your project. There's current, what we're doing right now, there's near term and future. And in the current, you have a granular focus on things. You specify exactly what you're doing. You don't allow that to be too flexible. There's, specs and designs. You kind of know what you're doing. But then in the near term, it's a bit more vague. It's like there's some flexibility. You're not quite focusing in quite so hard on the tasks. And then in the future, it's much more woolly and vague. And this seems much more like the kind of thing I'm into, rather than like Gantt charts that try and track forensically what you're going to be doing in 2 years' time. Yeah, my final slide is about self-care. I think this is a really important thing. I think that if you're going to go off into like the creative wilderness, you know, like sort of hacking your way through the jungle with a machete, where like all the foliage is above your head and you're sort of heading in a direction, you don't even know if there's anything in that direction to, you know, any destination you're heading for. I think you have to accept that that's going to be a bit scary, and that you know, it's going to require some bravery, and you shouldn't like beat yourself up if it feels scary or hard. Talking and thinking counts as work. When I started making video games, I was really used to just like getting in every morning for 5 days a week and spending a whole day like, working on the video game, and that meant, you know, typing things into a computer that would make the video game bigger or better. You know, doing tangible work on a video game. And these days that just doesn't happen in the same way. Like I spend a lot of my time talking to people about what they're doing and just thinking about stuff. And yeah, like there's just less time doing programming than there used to be. And you know, I think I went through a period of feeling like that was like I was failing. Like, oh man, I'm just not getting anything done. And you know, I think you just have to accept that this is also work. Like just having a chat, even if you know, thinking back to that Alfred Hitchcock quote, you know, even the bits where you're not talking about the game, but you're just kind of mulling things over or sort of distracting yourself, and you're allowing your subconscious to work on a thing, to figure a thing out, you know, that counts as work. And, you know, if I get 3 days a week of actual, if you know, like right now it's like programming UI stuff. Like if I get 3 days a week of that, I feel like amazingly lucky. For us, this is a specific point, I guess, about the way I work with Dick Hogg, is that like a big part of what makes this work for us is that we share this lead creative role. So, you know, it's natural that, you know, both of us go through periods of feeling more pessimistic about things or just overwhelmed by, you know, whatever's going on. And usually the way it works is that, you know, the peaks and troughs kind of balance each other out. You know, one of us is feeling, you know, tired or down or whatever. The other one tends to be more enthusiastic or able to provide support, and vice versa. That's really helped us. I'm not sure I would want to have a role where I'm the only lead creative person carrying a team of people who haven't been through this. I don't think I would enjoy that very much. And finally, optimism. I think conveying optimism, even when you don't feel it really, is really important and useful. For one thing, it like, you know, being optimistic about things fosters a sense of optimism in the other people in your team. But also, if you just practice feeling optimistic or pretending to feel optimistic often enough, it's like your brain muscles start to get used to it, and it, you know, over time it sort of slowly starts to become more like your natural state. Yeah, that is the end of my slides. I want to thank Terry Burdak for getting me to come and do this talk. I haven't actually written a talk for many, many years. It was quite fun to do. I think, I don't really understand what that time was saying over there, but I think I've got time for questions. I can't actually see any of you. It's quite bright up here. But like, maybe if I do this. Yeah, that'll do it. So yeah, if anyone has questions, I think there's like a microphone that gets passed around. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
How would you imagine your approach and the approach your studio takes to game development would scale to larger studios?
So the question is like, how does this scale when you add more people? I don't know the answer to that question. My experience is solely with, like the smallest team I've worked in is like 3 people, and the biggest team I've worked in is maybe 20 people. And when I think about the kinds of things I want to make in the future, I'm absolutely making those decisions on the basis of not wanting those things to scale up to be bigger. So I guess it's like a problem that I'm like aware that it probably, like I'm sure there are ways that this kind of stuff can scale to some extent. Like I feel like I could have 30 people would probably be all right. 200 people, no idea. Like and way outside of my comfort zone, but also just like I just don't want to make a thing that involves that many moving parts or pieces. Like it's just not. I almost feel like it's as different a thing to the kind of things I make as like making something that's not even a video game. Like I can't. It's beyond my comprehension about how I would even tackle that. So yeah. There's a person here.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, how do you stop people from crunching? Because it feels like that is kind of difficult in the climate we have in video games at the moment, is even when your boss is like, you don't need to crunch, there still is this underlying theme of people do it anyway.
So the question is, how do you stop people crunching when it's like, sort of, I guess you're saying it's like, it's kind of part of the culture, and how do you push against that culture? But I think by explicitly pushing against it, by explicitly saying, why are you go away? what are you doing here? Stop, I'm not, like, I don't, it's 8 o'clock, I'm not, go away, go and do something else. We don't have to do that much of that. I think that you can set the tone of that fairly effectively, right? Like I think people, when people really get the sense that, oh no, it really is okay just to work like normal hours, then it's, you know, it's not a thing I've spent huge amounts of time pushing against, but definitely at times we've had to sort of explicitly say, like, stop working now. Like, or you know, another thing that happens is people look at a list of stuff they have to do and freak out, and they're like, oh, but how are we, you know, and their natural, you know, first instinct is, well, I'm going to have to work this weekend, I have to work really hard. And it's like, no, we can just, this list can change, you know, or some of it can get pushed later, or you know, or we can, you know, rearrange things so we just have more time, right? Like, or you know, or that thing that we said we were going to do, we're not going to do, like, and it's just making sure you that you put yourself in a situation where the people you're working with understand that that's a conversation that can be had, you know, like a list is not in charge. Yeah. This person here.
So you said this was an organic process that you discovered through time. What were some of the pitfalls that you discovered while you were trying to get more of these processes happening and trying to get it to be like more, these roles that we're taught are a bit more like, this is one person's job, just leave it to them. How did you discover were like some of the major pitfalls in spreading these out?
Yeah. When we made Hohokum, there wasn't Slack, hadn't been invented yet. So we made Hohokum primarily with email. Fucking email, Jesus. Why are we still using email? I really want them to just turn it off. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Imagine if they said next year, 2020, we're just going to turn the email off. We're going to use that bandwidth for something else. Just turn it off. It's really bad. Yeah, so we made Hohokum with email and like phone calls and me and Dick meeting up and me and Dick meeting up with animators. And man, it was a nightmare, like at times. You know, the parts where Dick and I would meet up and we would often go to the British Library and just talk about the game. That part was good, and then we would often write up our notes. And then it's like, you've got all these other people, you've got like gameplay programmers, you've got, you know, audio folks, you've got animators, and someone has to talk to all those people and like make sure that they're all on the same page. And like, it was a lot of effort for Dick and I to make sure that we were on the same page. And sometimes we weren't. And sometimes we'd be like, I would tell somebody something, and Dick would tell somebody something else, and there'd be this like, oh, there's a kind of, this isn't right. Like, we haven't actually quite got onto the same page, and now we're asking someone to do something when previously, like, and then those people kind of feel like, well, what's going on? We don't really know We don't feel secure in what we're being asked to do. And towards the end of that process, we actually started having more meetings at the British Library where we just got more people to come. And we just had like, you know, kind of like, and sometimes those meetings were a bit like me and Dick having a conversation with some other people sat around, and then just trying to fold those people in to that process so that like, and then once that started working, it was great. Like, you know, we ended up having amazing creative meetings where animators would just be like, oh, we could do this. And it'd be like, yeah, that's a great idea. All right, cool. Can you program that? Yeah, good. Okay. And then like these like things will start happening. And like basically Slack that's kind of how we run our Slack. Like there is this, you know, this process by which people are just meeting and chatting, and like the creative leads can kind of keep an eye on it and can steer it, but can often just allow those conversations to happen organically. Yeah. So I guess the answer is like, you know, technology has made it better. I've never worked in a big room with all the people in a game, but I imagine that if you did that, you would have arranged similar, you know, things in real life rather than on the internet. Guy here.
Because your design process is all wibbly wobbly and you're not sure of what you're actually making until like halfway through the project,
Yeah.
How do you know it's a good time to start talking to publishers?
That's a great question. When's a good time to start talking to publishers? I think that games have a kind of inner spirit that can often transcend their form, current or final form, right? And when we made Hohokum, we made a whole load of prototypes which were nothing like Hohokum really, but aesthetically, visually and aesthetically, and the vibe of them had like there was enough of a DNA that we felt, although actually a lot of those prototypes we didn't show to many people at all. You know, there was a kind of intent that you could derive from them. When we made Wilmot's Warehouse, the first version of that didn't even have Wilmot in it. Like it was a game where you just move stuff around with a cursor, and we pitched that. I think that it's okay to talk to people on the basis of like the kind of high-level vision and maybe a sense of what the visual aesthetic is or the design aesthetic, without there being like a, you know, yeah. I'm definitely not saying that like you start with literally no idea what you're making and you start, you know. I think there's always like, well, let's make a game about like a warehouse, or let's make a game where it's like kind of like a colourful toy. You know, there are ways to start somewhere that gives you something that you can talk about, hopefully with, you know, in a way that's interesting to publishers. I think there's a guy over here somewhere. Yeah, this guy here at back. Sorry. Times.
How do you find the people that you want to work with, and what? How do you interact? Like, how do you find them? What services do you use to find them?
Yeah, how do we find people to work with? A range of ways, broadly through Twitter. Think that a bunch of the people that we work with were people that we were sort of already aware of their work from stuff they'd done, and you follow them on Twitter and kind of just keep an eye on what they're doing, and you can DM them and say, hello, do you want to make a thing with us? Or you know, bumping into them at GDC, bumping them into other games events. You know, I feel like you just kind of, I feel like I've reached a point where you just know a bunch of people and they know people, and there's just this sort of cloud of people around doing stuff. We've employed very few people from agencies, but we've employed a couple. Yeah, word of mouth, Twitter, social media, friends of friends, games conferences, and just like, and definitely not like, it's definitely not like a thing where we advertise for jobs and then people apply and then it's generally more organic than that. Generally it's more like you have a chat with somebody and you're like, hey, what are you doing in 6 months' time? Are you interested in maybe working on a thing? And then, you know, maybe that will come to nothing, or maybe it will come to something, but, you know, you start sort of putting feelers out to people you might be interested in working with. Goldie.
Hi, I was just wondering what the average development cycle is for your projects.
Average length of time. So I would say, if I'm just going to pull a number out of my arse, I'll say 2 years, but 2.5, 3 years wouldn't be unexpected. 18 months sometimes. I think the shortest game we've made in recent years, like, years ago I used to make Flash games and web games and stuff, and so then the answer would have been like 3 months, 4 months or something, or less. But in recent times, I think Frobisher Says was like 10 months or something from when we first started making it to when we shipped it as like a launch Vita game. Hohokum was a weird thing that's hard to put a finger on because, like I said, we iterated on little prototypes for years. And then when we got it signed, I think it was about 2.5 years. Loot Rascals was a bit less. Loot Rascals was, I think, under 2 years, just under 2 years. The current game has been more than 2 years. But yeah, 2 to 3, something like that. There's a guy there.
Just on that with the development times, you say sort of 2 to 3 years. Obviously that's quite a vast difference in budgetary terms as far as development with a team, depending on the size and scale and length of development. How do you manage those fluctuations when you've got projects that can vary quite a lot? Do you know how long they're going to be before they start, or if it's quite fluid and that changes, how do you manage the budgetary side of that?
Yeah, the first thing, so yeah, that's a question like how do you kind of get a sense of, how do you plan is really what you're asking, isn't it? How do you plan when figuring out what you're going to be doing in the gaps and when things are going to start? One thing I'd say is it's definitely not full-time, a whole team full-time for 2.5, 3 years. Like there's definitely a period at the start where you're ramping up and a period at the end where you're ramping down and thinking about the next thing. We've done a bunch of overlapping things, so like one thing is coming to an end and you've already started prototyping on the new thing. Wilmot's Warehouse was a game that we just made originally for Humble in like 5 months because we were like waiting for our next project to start, and it was like, well, we could afford to, we had the money, to keep just the sort of very core bit of the company running for like 6 months or so while we were waiting for this our current game to start. We were like, well, we might as well do something. Let's make this warehouse thing. And then yeah, that kind of, we did that with Humble, and then it was like good enough that we wanted to kind of we wanted to make a bigger, proper version of Wilmot's Warehouse, like a really fancy one with all the things we wanted to do to it. And so then we just like hired a guy to help do that, in the background. But yeah, I don't think there's like a. I also think that we've been quite lucky to like work with people again and again. We've reached the point now. Definitely wasn't true in the past, but at this point we've reached the point where we have enough. I guess we've made enough interesting things that we're able to have conversations with publishers early enough without really having a thing that's tangible that we're ready to pitch, that gives us a degree of flexibility that then means that we can afford to be slightly less like properly blocking out like what the next couple of years looks like, I guess. In the past I've just done a whole load of like weird random freelancing gigs to fill holes in the cash flow. There's a guy here. I don't know how much time I've got left either, so someone will have to cut me off at some point. 5 minutes. Cheers. Sorry, there's somebody just here. Yeah.
You're mentioning that you sort of like to have ideas coming from anywhere towards at least the end of a project. I was just wondering how important you think it is for people's tastes to overlap, I guess, or like does that alter how receptive you are to different people's ideas, or do you find it's just naturally you're drawn to people with similar taste? Yeah, how do you make sure that there's like a coherent set of tastes within the team and that the ideas that are coming from anywhere aren't just completely random or out of step with each other? I think that it's partly that you work with people who have at least partially similar tastes. Although we don't look for that explicitly, I think that you're obviously going to be working with people who are able to do the job that you're asking them to do. So, whatever the art style of your game, you're going to be hiring artists, for example,
who can make art that fits the art side of the game. And then I think over time, you know, there's definitely a period of time in the project when you start getting people in where people's tastes aren't going to be quite on the nose for the thing that you want it to be, and you just kind of gently steer them. You know, there's definitely a bit of like, oh, that's not quite right, but, you know, this bit's interesting, and you just kind of bump it a little bit, and slowly over time, people just kind of get, you know, naturally I think, you know, smart creative people will just kind of naturally gravitate towards a shared consensus about what the right feel is. And yeah, you definitely, yeah, in my experience, you definitely get to the point where, towards the end, when, you know, you're just making all the stuff, you know, the creative leads don't have to spend tons of time, you know, micromanaging all the decisions, because the decisions by that point tend to just be, you're just basically going, yeah, this is great, yeah, more of this, yeah, oh, that's great too, yeah, you know, maybe making minor tweaks, but broadly not having to, you know, stick your oar in too much towards the end. Any question here?
How would you keep everyone in your team motivated to keep working over such a long period of time?
How do we keep everyone motivated over such a long period of time? I think motivation mainly comes in long projects from breakthroughs, right? Like, you know, at the start, just having anything on the screen is like, wow, look what we did. We made a thing on the screen. And then, you know, and then it's like you have to do some more work. And then at a certain point, someone puts the first bit of like final art in the game. You're like, wow, look at that thing. It looks amazing. I love that. And then that's like a little bump. And then, you know, a programmer introduces a whole new cool system, and that's really fun to play with. And you just, over a long period of time in a project, there are going to be a whole bunch of exciting, interesting things that happen that everyone can get excited about. And hopefully that, you know, like definitely, I think it's definitely, I think I said in one of my original slides, it's like we're making interesting creative decisions right up until the end. And that's part of it, right? Like, it's definitely not like we will spend the pre-production process making all of the fun, interesting decisions and figuring out all the things that we need to do and like wiring all the basic stuff. And then we will spend 2 years just turning the handle, cranking this stuff out. It's not that. It's definitely not. It's like, you know, we're still like making cool stuff and talking about it in ways which are interesting, you know, kind of right up until the end of the project. And I think that's perhaps part of what makes it feel like you keep getting, you know, little bursts of enjoyment from the thing you're making, even quite long down the line. Maybe time for one last super quick question, or not? Come on, let's do it. Let's do it. 43 seconds.
You mentioned that you find people through friends, through social contacts and conferences. Can you see yourself working with people from the Australian game dev community?
Yeah, we've worked with people in, all over the place. Like Australia time zone wise is not amazing, but it's not terrible. Like, yeah, we've worked with people in all continents. I don't think we've done any Australian folks recently. Canada, America, all over Europe, all over the UK. But yeah, no reason why not. 7 seconds, I think I did it. Thank you.
All right, so everyone hit up Ricky for a job, yeah? That does bring the opening session to a close. Go forth, learn from each other, stay hydrated. I will see you later.